Greetings. Welcome to Spiritual Warriorship, where we read and discuss books by His Holiness Bhaktitirtha Swami and endeavor to develop a powerful, strong spiritual life. We are this evening discussing from Spiritual Warrior 3. Chapter 9, Spiritual Warrior 3, subtitle, Solace in this difficult times, finding solace in this difficult time. And the chapter we're on are Guidelines for Responsible Action. And I hope you've been following us as we've been through a number of chapters in this particular book. I hope it has encouraged you who have been regular listeners, or even if you just came one time, to want to try and get a copy of this book. As I've said, you can get it at Krishna.com store or at the publisher's website, harinamapress.org. So, let us get started. I was thinking I would put out a question, but I won't. It's very difficult getting answers, I found, and it's all right. What I realized, my main purpose really is to be a servant, to serve my Gurudev, who is Bhaktitirtha Swami, and to serve you by sharing what he has given to all of us. And then I guess you could say after hearing, it's our responsibility to use them to reach a higher state of consciousness, because that's what this is all about. So let's go, because tonight we want to discuss his commentary on power. So as I said, I don't know how many of you are back, but we began this chapter titled Guidelines for Responsible Action. Being reminded that we are always acting. We're in some kind of activity. Even if we're asleep, there is action going on. And he reminded us that in Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna inquired about wanting to be inactive, remember? He didn't want to go on the battlefield and fight. He thought he'd just take a begging bowl or go off in the woods. And Krishna said, no way. You have a duty. You have a role. You must fight. So he illustrates and Krishna instructs that we should devote our activities to the development of our spiritual life. Because again, he told Arjuna, you do what you're to do, fight, but know you're doing it to please me. So if we keep God in the center, know that whatever we're doing is really to please the Lord, then we will get reciprocation. And also, if we're doing it that way, we're more likely to avoid activities and that will affect our karmic reactions. We talked a lot about karmic reactions. So as we do this, even our ordinary actions every day, eating, we offer to the Lord. And working, we know that we're serving the Lord and helping others in our environment and caring for our families. They're all activities, but if Krishna's in the center, they go to a higher level. So we looked at that, and we also discussed quite a bit, I thought, the difference between helping, serving, and fixing. I hope those who heard those discussions have become more mindful and vigilant as you endeavor to in quotes, help others in what's going on. It's really encouraged me to be careful and vigilant. And then we looked at the humility of service, if you recall, by him telling us, we can't fix anybody. You know, we have to be careful of our well-intentioned, egocentric efforts because they fail. If you've noticed, you decide, oh, something's wrong with him, I'm going to fix this, and you start. But if you're doing it from an egotist, I'm the one that's going to help him because, or her, because they're way out of line, it's going to fail. It's not going to work. Why? It's not until we recognize that a power, force far greater than us is at work. And this again comes to our spiritual life of knowing who we are, who God is, and our relationship with him. So when we recognize that forces greater than ours are at work and that our job is simply to be the conduits and facilitators for the help that is being made available by God. And I say, can't leave God out the picture. So he reminds us that we're all eternal servants of God and each other. He constantly reminds us that we're to care for each other. So as we allow that divine to act through us, we will witness amazing developments, which is far beyond our wildest dreams. But if, on the other hand, we function based only on our own abilities, the results would be moderate. So I hope you're getting the point. And this has been the thread throughout, how to realize that we're not the doers, but we are used to help with God helping us. So we got through seeking divine empowerment, where he reminds us that for genuine spiritual warriors, and if you're here, you're a spiritual warrior, and it's about getting real and true and sincere and see how your life changes and how you can bring change to others. For a genuine spiritual warrior, an apparently insurmountable obstacle is cause for excitement. Why? Because we wonder what our wonderful Lord will do. This again, when you hear this and you think of what some obstacle comes in my way and stuff can come up all the time, I get excited. If you are on the spiritual warrior path and you are knowing your condition, who you are as a servant, and you're knowing, as he mentioned so often, that you keep God in the center, you will definitely have amazing development. And you will get excited because you will then have faith and trust in the Lord to see how he works it out, because you're focusing on him, not what that person's saying and that person's doing. It may not be right, it may be painful, hurtful, but you know, this is knowing who is the controller and the arranger. So he says the journey becomes an adventure with an unknown outcome. How about that? An obstacle, but you get excited and you see it as an adventure because you know you're not alone. Now perhaps the Lord will bring order to chaos. Trust that. Perhaps he'll clean up the nonsense and perform some other kind of miracle. I remember Bhakti Tirtha Swami used to tell us expect a Krishna miracle. Whatever's going on, it seems so chaotic and confusing. But if you know, as we've said and mentioned, he's there with you. So he can perform some kind of miracle and make the impossible a reality. Everything is based on our level of devotion and commitment. So the real workers for God are almost gleeful when there's a problem that requires the Lord's intervention, because they know that the Lord will never let them down. I just went through a little something like that. Something came up was it yesterday or a few days ago, and I made it a problem, although it seemed like quite a big problem, obstacle for me to move on to something else. And I found myself getting a little antsy. What does this mean? Does I have to change this plan and change that? And somewhere along the way, wait a minute, what am I trying to do with this? There's some reason for it, and we've been told in these readings, there's a plan and a reason for everything. So I relaxed. I'm going to say I did, because I really wasn't sure what move to make. And I just said, okay, Krishna, you know what's best in this situation. And all I can say is, today at about, 4 o'clock, I was suddenly clear of what action to take. And I went to my email and responded to the email, I will do so and so and so. And it feels right. Now, the thing is, what I've agreed to and said I'm going to do, as I look at the whole picture, there's still aspects of it I'm not sure, or I feel may be difficult for me. But somehow I know that calmness that came and that decision, and then I took action on it, that the rest will be taken care of. So for me, it is now an adventure to really see how the Lord is working it out. Okay? So take in what you're getting here, and it's step by step of how to raise higher. So he tells us that there are different types of power. Different types of power influence individuals, communities, nations, and the planet. But ultimately, the degree of love expressed determines the nature of the power and its effects on the environment. And again, if you've been following, he always brings in the importance of love in order to bring some balance in the environment or the situation. And if you weren't with us in the beginning, I don't know exactly which class it was, but we did discuss Spiritual Warrior 2, Transforming Lust into Love, and some wonderful chapters in that book if you want to go back and read or hear about that. So we're going on. He said various types of powers are available to all of us to a greater or lesser degree, according to the intensity of our desire and efforts to acquire them. And you know for yourself, if there's something you really desire and want, you put everything into it, even if it seems like 1,000 obstacles are in the way. Now, part of our duty as spiritual warriors is to recapture these various powers and use them to benefit others. To benefit others. When we have power, we have ammunition to make things happen. Otherwise, we're no more than sentimental philosophers. So the question then becomes whether our power is aligned with God and His agents. You see, we have to keep God in the center. A true spiritual warrior is weary of misusing power. And we've been through him telling us how we must be vigilant of our thoughts, words, actions, deeds. He's told us how to use discernment in our environment and association. So a true spiritual warrior is weary of misusing power, realizing that ultimately all power belongs to God. He created everything. He's the source of everything. Everything is His energy. So all power belongs to Him. But He uses us as facilitators to manifest it through us. So we don't want to misuse it. We should never forget that the dark forces are also extremely powerful. And they can cause great damage. It is our responsibility to have the discernment, remember that word, to recognize the difference and to align our power only with the highest. And that's what spiritual warriors are for. So now he gives us his commentary on different powers. The first and most obvious type of power is physical power. Now, when physical strength is the law by which an individual or group functions, we tend to see a great deal of what? Struggle and abuse, such as corruption, war, genocide, ecocide. Now, although this behavior is extremely animalistic, many societies still function on this level. The second kind is institutional power, found in government, churches, political parties, and other organizations. In this type of power, the structure, rules, and survival of the organization tend to become the ends in themselves, while the power often becomes a matter of leaders occupying figurehead positions and acting in an extremely superficial way, minimizing the genuine care and growth of the people they're supposed to be caring for and serving. And we've seen that. Sometimes just a little group. Okay, let's name it. We're going to do this and do that. Well, we got to have a president, or we got to have, okay, you be the president. I want to be the vice president. I want to be this. And before you know it, the people who form the group, everybody's got a title. And then each one wants to show how powerful their title is. Well, you can't do this until you ask me. And what was the original purpose and meaning? We've come together so we could serve others, or, feed the hungry or something, and suddenly we're fighting among ourselves. Have to be very, very careful. Most of the available energy is directed towards maintaining the strength and coherence of the organization and the privileges of the leaders. Now, viewed in this way, institutional power is far removed from physical power and violence. In another sense, though, it's worse because it causes psychological suffering. People who are mistreated by institutions can feel even greater sense of betrayal, frustration, and apathy than victims of physical violence. And many of them can become atheists and anarchists. Any situation in which the institution becomes an entity unto itself, as if it were in fact the essence, has the potential to be extremely dangerous, because myopic power can hurt, abuse, and exploit people. Now, despite the risk of disappointment and correction, institutions can also serve to bring individuals together to develop their consciousness. Have you noticed this with his writings and presentation? He puts in your face what's the obstacle, the concern, how we go wrong, or how things are. And he just told us here about organizations. But you see, once he gives you that, you gotta pay attention. What I'm realizing, if you can let the mind go off into remembering incidents, this happened, that happened. Oh yeah, I know that. That leader, that person did that. Oh, can't stand him. If I saw him, I'd punch him. You know. But you go with the flow, because what he does, he brings you back to a higher level. And this is what spiritual warriorship is, as we are out with others. It's about seeing what's going on. It's not head in the sand, but it's recognizing it and then see how to go to a higher level. He says now, despite the risk of disappointment and corruption, institutions can also serve to bring individuals together to develop their consciousness. Such institution requires leaders who are attuned, powerful, loving, compassionate, and focused on truly serving their constituents. In other words, what do they require? Spiritual warriors. That's what you're preparing yourself for. That's what you're building your consciousness of. Okay? And you hear the qualities. Loving, compassion, focus on truly serving. So we go from institutional power to emotional power. He says the third category of power is emotional power. Now, emotional power affects our passions and emotions. It is the power that makes us worship entertainers and athletes as if they were God himself, to such an extent that we may fall into a trance-like ecstasy or faint in their presence. We all know people who have pictures of movie stars, sports stars, heroes, famous singers on their walls. We know. We used to do it ourselves. I mean, I used to do it myself. These star-struck individuals dress like them, talk like them, walk like them. And if we mention some tidbit about them, drop what they're doing to want to hear about every detail. They may stand in line for hours to buy a concert ticket or wait outside the building 10 stories below, not even sure that the object of their affection is at home in the apartment above. This phenomenon unleashes a tremendous amount of power. And that is why certain destructive, scheming individuals with a variety of agendas have infiltrated the entertainment field in order to affect the minds of millions of people. Here again, it's a warning of how to be visual, discerning, and aware of how you're using your power and your time. He says the next is academic power. Academia has enormous influence in Western civilization. Anyone who has associated with academic types knows that our society attributes a tremendous amount of power to these individuals and their mental gymnastics. Although the academic world has a culture of its own, it has a large, huge impact on the larger society. What these so-called teachers promote actually becomes accepted as the standard of truth and knowledge just because of the powerful mystique they possess in this culture. The types of powers listed so far are essentially material and or psychological. They are developed by our material efforts and can be used for the upliftment or degradation of society depending on our motivations. They are also temporary. Physical strength can wane. Political power and fame can be great one day and gone the next. Even our academic notoriety can vanish overnight when our theories are replaced with new ideas. Okay, what do you think is coming next? He tells us that the powers we've just discussed are essentially material. Where will he take us next? As we mentioned earlier, he puts in our face what's there, how it looks, and how we may react to it, and others will. And it should get us thinking, oh yeah, but something doesn't. So what does he say next? Intuitive powers, that's right. He's going to go into higher powers now that we can bring about in our lives. Because I think earlier he had said these powers, we can react, get them in our lives. He says God and our own spiritual essence guide us from within at all times. However, it is up to us how much we listen and pay attention to this guidance. You at times, I'm sure all of us have had an instant when we get some sense of something to do, or the right thing to do, or call somebody or help somebody. It comes from within. The Lord is in the heart. He sees all, knows all, past, present, future. We must also, he reminds us, discern what is guidance and what is the influence of our senses and environment. So that's why, if you've been noticing what he's giving, he's telling you what the senses will pick up on. He's telling us what the environment produces and how we may respond to it or pick it up. But he warns us, if we're vigilant and discern what's going on, we can be responsible, as the title is. And this is what these guidelines are telling us, for what's going on, so we can make the change, because only we can do it from inside. So we must also discern what is guidance and what is the influence of our senses and environment. As we develop the ability and trust to hear and let ourselves be guided by this divine inspiration, we develop amazing insight and the capacity to inspire ours. That's ours. And as we said before, if we're mindful and alert and vigilant, I like using that word, we will see how, as our consciousness changes, almost miracles seem to happen if we're following. Now, sacred power results from following standardized formulas and a bona fide system, teachers and prophets. As people engage in austerities and selfless service, they naturally develop empowerment in harmony with the laws of the universe. They open themselves up to inspiration from higher realms. When directed properly, sacred power can propel them, those who are at that state, toward transcendence and divine power. Now, divine power is the greatest of all, because it contains the highest adoration and appreciation for the source of all power. Divine power comes to those who realize that they must emulate the lives of the most advanced saints, showing mercy, tolerance, full surrender, and love for all of God's creations. And if you have been reading Bhagavad Gita, have read Bhagavad Gita, you'll see that's our purpose. Krishna guides us towards, and at the very end, surrender unto me. We must have God at the center. Now, divine power manifests when we become humble enough to fully offer ourselves to God, to be used like puppets. We went into humility last week, if you recall, how powerful humility is. We have reached the highest level of spiritual attainment at this point, when we totally surrender all personal agendas and desires. And this can happen. It's a gradual process. I've never read purport. I remember Prabhupada usually tells us about Krishna consciousness. It's a gradual process. But again, as we said earlier, if we have strong, intense desire, the Lord reciprocates and helps us to fulfill those desires. And I like the expression greed. We're greedy for higher consciousness. It can happen through a process. So if you're hearing this and saying, "Oh, me, I don't see myself," yes, it's possible. Expect a Krishna miracle. Expect a miracle from God, because He feels that, knows that desire. He's right in your heart, and will begin the process if you are attuning yourself as we're going through these different powers. The direct energy of the Lord can enter so that we begin to act in accordance with what He wants to accomplish. Let's go back again. I like this. Divine power manifests when we become humble enough to fully offer ourselves to God to be used like puppets. And if you have this book, Spiritual Warrior 3, review humility with under the 12 qualities of a spiritual warrior. And one of it, I remember, he says, humility means we don't know as much as we think we know. We have to continue learning. We have reached the highest level of spiritual attainment. So that's the path we're on. Spiritual attainment at this point, when we totally surrender our personal agendas. I, me, mine. This is mine. I'm going to do. I'm. You know. When we surrender that, because we know that we're servants of God, we know that He's the arranger, He's the controller, and He acts through us. Again, it goes back to the first part we said. There must be action. There's always action. It's not about sitting twiddling your thumbs and say, well, I'll just sit here. No, you must act. But you're acting from a centered place of knowing, knowledge. Who's got your back? So then, when you do that, the direct energy of the Lord can enter so that we begin to act in accordance with what He wants to accomplish. Our work is done as if God is doing it Himself. In Vedic terminology, such empowered individuals are called Avesha avatars. And this divine power known as Devya is considered infinitely superior to Purushakara, which is strength generated by one's own intelligence and abilities. It is this divine empowerment that every spiritual warrior lives for. And we know, I say, it's not impossible, because it's being brought to our sight, it's being brought to our ears, and we just have to desire it and begin the process. So it's, are there any questions, comments on what we have gone through? Nothing. Okay. Is there anybody out there? Okay. Hi, Evie. I hope this is coming through and your heart is open. We're going to look at keeping spiritually attuned. Now, of course, you're in the material world. That sounds very important, doesn't it? Because we're in a material body, in the material world. But He's been giving us step by step step. How? And if you've been following and reading your Bhagavad Gita or the Srimad Bhagavatam, for me, these step-by-step, so right in your face, makes you realize what you may have been getting entangled in, and then he tells you how to move out of it, and that takes us deeper into those studies. He tells us Moses was one of the most spiritually attuned people of his time. And as a result, God gave him a special task in a period of great calamity. The Lord provided Moses with special sight and direction to help him carry out his assignment. We too must be tuned to the Lord's mission, not only for our own personal survival, but also for the sake of all innocent people being victimized by the destructive mindsets of the modern world. Spiritual warriors, we have a mission, powerful mission. We must keep alert to the issues plaguing us, because every resident of this planet in some way shares a destiny. If we prepare properly, we may circumvent crisis that would otherwise be inevitable. If we prepare properly. And he's been telling us, discern, visual, step by step, knowing you're an eternal servant. What can be, what it looks like, what this material energy presents to us, and how to go beyond it. When we dedicate ourselves to serving the divine will, our capacities may expand in incredible ways. For example, as a youngster, he's telling us this pastime of his. He said, I had an extremely bad stutter that required years of speech therapy. And yet, whenever I discussed holy topics and spirituality, I was fluid and coherent. By the Lord's grace, around that time, I became a child evangelist on radio and television. And it was as if the Supreme Lord was directly reminding me that he had one, he was the one doing the talking. That reminds me, even in the Bible, when Jesus performed what seemed to be miracles and all, one of his statements, it's not me who doeth the work, but the Father within. So we have to know the Lord within uses us to get it done. Now, when presidents, kings, and other leaders speak, the idea is not for them to communicate on their own accounts, but rather to serve as mouthpieces for the Lord. Originally, leaders were meant to act as mediums or as connections to the higher kingdoms. The role of a spiritual teacher or guru emphasizes this connection even more. That person's duty is to act as a spiritual postman who delivers transcendental messages to the right addresses. As for how spiritual warriors should live, Jesus Christ gave us many perfect examples. So did Buddha and Prophet Muhammad, as well as many other great teachers. Once again, we must ask ourselves, why are we not following these examples? We may call ourselves Christians, but are we really Christ-like? If we're Buddhists, are we truly Buddha-like? If we're Muslim, do we behave as Muhammad did? We should be looking at the behavior of Jesus Christ, the Buddha, Prophet Muhammad, and other spiritual emissaries for examples of how to conduct ourselves. When we live for ourselves, we do not care so much for how we affect others. But as we become more spiritually oriented, and that's our purpose, we specifically concern ourselves with what we say, what we do, why we do it, and how we do it, based on how our actions affect the community. Okay? You understand that? As we become more spiritually orientated, and if we're hearing these classes, if you're reading Bhagavad Gita, hearing Srila Prabhupada, chanting on beads, you're becoming more spiritually oriented. So you specifically then concern yourself, be mindful, vigilant, alert, if you will, with what we say, what you say, what you do, why you do it, and how you do it. Because again, remember we went through all that thing about karma. And again, we want to end karmic reactions. So he's telling us how to be spiritually oriented. Now this is not overkill, obsessions or paranoia. It is perfectly appropriate because spiritual life is about eternal community and dynamic relationship with God as the nucleus. As spiritual warriors, our duty is to replicate the original atmosphere of the spiritual kingdom wherever we go. We're not just waiting for a pie in the sky outcome or biding our time on earth until we ourselves go to the spiritual kingdom, oblivious to all pain surrounding us in the meantime. No, we have an important mission to uplift others and support their spiritual evolution. Spiritual warriors, we have a mission. And I'm going to end there. We'll begin next week with being responsible leaders. But I think we've covered quite a bit to practice this week. I hope you're taking these points and what do you call guidelines, this chapter, guidelines for responsible action, and putting them into practice in your life. And if it doesn't work the first day, try it again the next day, and you say, I heard her last night and she said, and I just tried that, and we've come from many lifetimes bringing a lot of stuff that has to be purified and moved out the way. But we're getting the guidelines right now of how to do that. So I'm going to end tonight's class with that. Let me make a mark so I can remember where to start next week. And next week's going to be August. Can you imagine? We're almost to the holiday time. Okay, who's out there and what's going on, and any questions, any comments, any excitement about what you're hearing or what you plan to do or how you're going to use it or how you've used it and have seen results. Any reports? Who's out there?
Bhuvan Mohan.
Bhuvan Mohan is there. Eddie Bo.
Bhakti Shruti.
Bhakti Shruti. Welcome.
Anushka Patel.
Anushka Patel.
And Bhakta Patrick.
Bhakta Patrick. Welcome. Welcome. Some of your names are familiar, and I'm happy that you're there. I asked for comments, apparently there hasn't been any, right? Okay. You're all ready to go on the battlefield, spiritual warriors. And don't forget, that's a good term, because Arjuna had to go on the battlefield and fight. And we were shown how his fears and doubts almost stopped him from fulfilling his duty and mission. So with spiritual warriors, who one of our qualities is fearlessness, please try to get this book, Spiritual Warrior 3, if you can, and study those 12 qualities, and know that anything, I feel personally, anything that's been presented is possible, and it just means determination and strong desire. So if there are no comments, no questions, right? Okay, thank you all for coming. May you have a blessed week, and I look forward to meeting you next week, and maybe you can share with me some of your attempts or practices that are taking fruition. And don't forget, if you want to discuss something and you're not doing it online, my email, motherindrani108@gmail.com. I may take a minute or two, but if you write me, I will make every effort to reply. All right? Okay, have a blessed week. Hare Krishna, God bless.